When I asked for a divorce, Luis was just about to accompany his mistress to the hospital for a prenatal checkup. Seeing that I was serious, he fell silent for a few seconds and said, "I understand. I crossed the line. Don't worry. Whatever you ask for, I'll agree to it." Everyone else said that. In a way, I was lucky too, having been Mrs. Luis for 10 years. Even in divorce, Luis had not treated me badly, only I knew that. The year we graduated, I had come to Hong Kong for him, and the price was an almost complete break with my parents. Only I remembered that, back then, in order to marry me, he had 3 ribs broken. Of course, none of that mattered anymore. I looked at Luis, smiled, and said, "Good, then my condition is this: you are never to appear in front of me again." Chapter 1. Tonight's rain was especially heavy. The whole world seemed to be shrouded in an endless curtain of rain. The orange typhoon warning light was flashing over Victoria Harbor. It lit up once every 15 seconds, reminding everyone to prepare for disaster prevention. At this moment, Monica, the housemaid, lifted the packed luggage and said softly, "Ma'am, the wind outside has eased a little. Let's go to the other residence. The driver is already waiting in the parking lot." I gave a quiet hum and turned to glance at the wall clock. It was almost 10:30. Luis still had not come back. When he left during the day, he had told me to wait for him. Now it seemed I probably would not be able to. An hour later, the black Lincoln stopped at the hillside residence. The moment I got out of the car, I saw Luis supporting a girl as they walked out. Her belly was slightly rounded. She wore flats and a loose top, and her eyes were red as if she had been crying. I stood in the rain and lifted my head, meeting Luis's gaze. Monica seemed to be caught up by something and did not get out of the car in time to open an umbrella. The raindrops, as large as beans, poured down. In just a few seconds, more than half my hair was already soaked. Luis frowned slightly, unconsciously let go of the girl, and reached out to cover the top of my head with his hand. His broad palm still carried a trace of warmth, but it was quickly drenched through by the rain. "A typhoon is coming soon. Where are you going?" I lightly brushed his hand away, quickly walked a few steps under the eaves, and asked with a frown. Luis did not answer. He said to the people waiting nearby, "Take Victoria to the hospital first." I understood. No wonder he had dragged things out so late today and was going out again at this hour. She had probably used feeling unwell as an excuse to keep him tied up all day, and now she was making a fuss about going to the hospital for a checkup. Hearing that, the girl clutched tightly at Luis's sleeve, looking as if she were about to cry. In fluent Cantonese, she said hurriedly, "Luis, I don't want to be alone. Go with me." Luis soothed her with one sentence, "Don't be afraid. Go first." I was a little absent-minded, even though I had lived in Hong Kong for 10 years. My Cantonese was still not very good. Usually, Luis rarely spoke Cantonese with me. He always said, "Helen, you came to Hong Kong all alone for me. This isn't your hometown, and there's nothing familiar to you here. You don't have to learn these things for my sake. I'm the one who's wronged you." At this moment, I suddenly realized that the things he had said I did not need to learn were not only his past, but also his everyday life. I let out a murky breath and said to Luis, "I'll go in first. Hurry up. I have something to tell you." After saying that, I walked straight inside. I knew he would stay. As for how long he would stay, I did not care. A few minutes later, Luis sat down on the sofa. He seemed to be thinking about how to explain things to me. In truth, there was no need. I had known this girl for a long time already. She was Victoria, the youngest daughter of one of Luis's father's closest friends. She had just returned from Germany a year ago. The moment she saw Luis for the first time, she fell for him. A girl in her early 20s, once in love, offered herself up like a moth flying into the flame. In just half a year, she had burned through 30% of her family's fortune to serve as fuel for Luis's career. At that time, I had even teased him, saying he was an old cow eating young grass, using his face to swindle the assets of Victoria's family. Looking at it now, maybe this was the curse of love. When someone throws everything they have into love, someone else gets moved. No one can possibly resist it. Just like me, when I met Luis at 17 in a foreign land, when he reached out and protected me, didn't I fall in love too? That was why, at 22, I had abandoned everything and come to Hong Kong with him. Seeing him frown, I comforted him with one sentence. You don't need to explain anything to me. Hearing that, he seemed a little surprised, and guilt surfaced on his face. Helen, tomorrow I'll arrange for a lawyer to transfer 33% of the subsidiary's shares into your name. Not 3%. Luis, you cheated during our marriage. I want all of the subsidiary's shares. I took out the divorce agreement I had already prepared from my bag and gently pushed it in front of him. I looked at him and spoke calmly. Luis, let's get divorced. Chapter 2. The brief silence was like the calm before a typhoon arrives. Everyone knew it was false. All that remained was for the eye of the storm to gather and absorb enough force before charging straight toward the fragile harbor city. And then, heaven and earth would split apart, and everything would be destroyed. I saw a surge of fierce emotion flash through Luis's eyes, but he was no longer the reckless young man who had once been willing to have 3 ribs broken just to marry me. So after only a moment, that emotion was extinguished completely. Helen, you've made up your mind. It was not a question, but a statement. I nodded. Of course, otherwise, I wouldn't have come here. He paused, as if he understood. The hillside residence was only the distance of one hilltop away from the main house. Back then, Luis's father had been furious that he insisted on marrying me, and he had declared that as long as he was alive, he would never acknowledge me as his daughter-in-law. So in 10 years, the number of times I had come to the residence could be counted on one hand. I didn't know whether Luis was being tactful and had purposely arranged for Victoria to live here, or whether his father thought Victoria was the true daughter-in-law of the family and therefore qualified to live at the foot of the main house. In any case, I knew he was here, and I had come for one reason only, to get divorced. I understand. I crossed the line. Don't worry. Whatever you ask for, I'll agree to it. As he spoke, he reached into his pocket. Even though he touched it, he didn't take out the Mont Blanc fountain pen I had given him, the one he always carried with him. I didn't expose it. I merely handed him another pen at just the right moment. Then I tapped lightly at the agreement and said, I've already signed it. You should sign too. You know me. If it isn't something that belongs to me, I won't ask for it. I was urging him on, indirectly but unmistakably. He gave a low opened the pen cap, and paused for quite a long time. In the end, he still signed his name beside mine. 2024 11/10. Helen, Luis. Once he finished signing, I reached out, took the agreement back, and slipped it into the file folder. One thin sheet of paper, so thin that light could shine through it, and yet it carried the weight of my 10 years. With the divorce agreement in hand, I stood up and walked toward the second floor. Just before turning the corner, I bent slightly and asked him, Is the master bedroom occupied? He shook his head. No. I curved my lips into a faint smile and watched the dim yellow light fall over him. It made me think of the first time I came to the hillside residence. Back then, afraid I wouldn't be used to the dampness at the foot of the hill, he had brought several sets of silk bedding to change into. Refusing to let anyone else handle it, he personally spread out every layer of what lay underneath and what covered us. Carefully and meticulously, there in that master bedroom, layer upon layer, it had all been sincerity. It was just a pity that we stayed only one night, because the next day, he took me to the main house. The moment his father saw me, he was so furious he nearly fainted. Pointing at his nose, he cursed him bitterly. Of all the women in the world, why did you have to marry Nestor's daughter? I think you're doing this on purpose just to stab at my spine and infuriate me to death. When he saw that Luis refused to back down, his father grabbed the expensive ivory snuff bottle from the redwood table and hurled it hard at Luis's head. Then he snatched up the heavy solid Nan McCain and struck Luis across the back again and again. The dull sounds lasted for a long time, until he was too tired to continue, panting harshly as he roared at us. Get out! Get out! Only then did Luis grit his teeth and force himself upright. His face was deathly pale, and he could barely stand. Still, he held my hand and slowly led me out. Only after we went to the hospital did we learn that he had 3 broken ribs. Even though the pain was so severe he was close to passing out. In front of his father he had never once let go of my hand, and even at the very end he was still saying, word by word, I don't care whose daughter Helen is. In this lifetime, She's the only woman I'll marry. And yet, after only 10 years, before his father had even died, we had already come to an end. In a way, that was a good thing. It was better than his father dying and us still failing to make it. Chapter 3. That night, Luis only stayed for half an hour before leaving. I guessed that Victoria had just arrived at the hospital and had already called to urge him. Actually, I truly disliked the hillside residence. But that night, I slept unusually soundly. By coincidence, even the typhoon changed course. At the very last moment, it turned and went somewhere else, leaving Victoria Harbor calm and undisturbed. Only, I still did not know whether he remembered that day was our 10th wedding anniversary. Half a month later, I asked Luis to meet me at Government Building No. 12, Wan Chai Harbor, to formally file for divorce. In the courtroom, the lawyer said in a low voice, "Ma'am, Luis has also given you the 3 luxury homes in Repulse Bay, Deepwater Bay, and Central." I looked at Luis. He stood opposite me and gave me a slight nod, as if saying, "Take them, I owe you." I suppressed my emotions and said to the lawyer, "I don't want any of the properties or cars. Convert everything into shares. Let's make this quick." He nodded, then went back to discuss things with the lawyer. Taking advantage of that moment, Luis walked over to my side and said, as if making a promise, "Don't worry, you'll still receive the company's annual dividends." I smiled. I know, the reason I want the shares is just that. During this past year, I thought of a very interesting way to play this. Seeing me smile, he actually seemed a little more relaxed, and repeated the same words he had said that night. "Fine. As you wish. Whatever you ask for, I'll agree to it." I said nothing. I only felt a little nauseated. Because of Luis's generosity, the division of property went very quickly, and I was very satisfied with the final result. I got all the shares of the wholly owned subsidiary, with a market value of over $1.2 billion. I also got 45% of the shares in the 3 tech companies his family had invested in, worth around $700 million. Added to that were several newer companies Luis himself had picked over the past few years. All together, here and there, I took away more than $3 billion of his assets. It was not much, but it was not little either. Once everything was over, I finally got that certificate. My whole body felt light. I strode quickly down the corridor toward the exit. Helen. Luis chased after me a few steps, his voice getting louder and louder. I stopped impatiently, turned around abruptly, and looked at him. My brows drew together as I said, "Luis, stop calling me. It's disgusting." He froze for a second, and finally realized that the good face I had shown him over the past half-month had only been because I was waiting for the day the divorce was truly finalized. He was silent for a long while before finally speaking. "I just wanted to say, don't worry. If you have any other requests in the future, I'll agree to all of them." I smiled. A beam of light fell along the Roman pillar behind Luis, pointing straight at him. It was as if fate were playing tricks on me, asking, "Helen, are you really not going to think about it again?" There is still a beam of light on him. I did not hesitate. I nodded and said, "Sure, Luis." "Then my request is this, from now on, you are never allowed to appear in front of me again." For one instant, I saw a few cracks appear on his face, as if someone had punched him head-on, leaving him deathly pale, and I turned away with ease, lifting my foot to walk out. At that moment, the sun was at its highest point, shining Queens Road in dazzling gold. Compared with that one beam of light, here there was sunlight stretching for miles. Chapter 4. The news of my divorce from Luis spread very quickly. I didn't even have to think to know who had done it. Victoria had chased him obsessively for a whole year. She had finally managed to get pregnant with the treasured baby, and she had also waited until I took the initiative to divorce him. If she didn't spread the news all the way to the moon, it would only mean her family was useless. What I hadn't expected was that she was even more foolish than I had imagined. The moment I came out of the company, the entrance was already surrounded by reporters. Their cameras and microphones pointed at me, chirping noisily like sparrows in a vat of boiling oil. "Mrs. Luis, is it true that you and Luis have divorced? Is it because, in these 10 years, you never gave birth to a child?" "Mrs. Luis, according to rumors, Because you couldn't have children. Luis's father never acknowledged your status. Is that right? Will your divorce affect the company's future development? Were you thrown out? Mrs. Luis. Say something. Mrs. Luis. Mrs. Luis. I couldn't be bothered to respond. Just as I was about to have the bodyguards block them off, I saw Victoria walking toward us, one hand cradling her belly. Her voice carried a tone all her own, and very quickly drew the reporter's attention away from me. Oh dear, you're all going too far. It's already painful enough for her that she can't have children, and now she's divorced too, like a stray dog. And you still keep asking and asking. Those reporters were sharp as needles, and immediately turned their microphones toward her instead. Victoria, is the baby in your belly Luis's family's precious little grandson? Victoria, did Luis divorce his wife for you and the child you're carrying? Victoria, when can we expect you and Luis to have your wedding? Victoria smiled brightly and waved her hand. Soon, soon, boy or girl. It's all the same. Either way, it's Luis's first child. Seeing that my expression did not change, Victoria arched a brow and stepped close to me, lowering her voice. Stop pretending. If you want to cry, then cry. You can't blame anyone else. Who told you that you can't have children and can't keep hold of your man? I said nothing. I looked at her and raised my hand and slapped her across the face. After that sharp crack, the left side of Victoria's face turned red. She looked at me in fury and said, "You dare hit me?" I smiled. Why wouldn't I dare? The child in your belly is 3 months old. I only divorced Luis a few days ago. That is hard evidence that he cheated during the marriage. Say one more word, and I'll make sure your son is born carrying the label of illegitimate child. I slowly spoke in imitation of her tone. After I finished, she gritted her teeth and glared at me, the hatred in her eyes thick and obvious. I didn't understand it. Luis and I were already divorced. She was about to get what she wanted, so why hate me? Very soon, Luis's car pulled up by the roadside. He pushed open the door and walked straight over. The reporters tried to swarm around him too, but the bodyguards drove them aside. He looked at me, his expression darkening slightly. We hadn't seen each other for only a few days, but he had lost so much weight that even his custom-tailored suit looked a little empty on him. The moment Victoria saw him, she put on a wronged expression, rushed forward, and tried to cling to his arm, but he pushed her away directly. He came quickly toward me and asked, "Are you all right?" I arched a brow. What kind of act was this? Still, I answered politely, "I'm fine. I'm leaving now." After saying that, I prepared to walk away in the other direction. Victoria instantly flared up and shouted angrily, "Luis, I'm carrying your child, and you're asking whether she's all right?" She turned the side of her face that I had slapped toward him and said aggrievedly, "Look, she even hit me. Why does she get to hit me?" Luis's brows knitted together. He lowered his head and said, "Helen has always had a mild temperament. What exactly did you say or do to provoke her? Can't you be a little more sensible?" Victoria was scolded so bluntly that she froze where she stood. Meanwhile, he lifted his foot and came after me, saying, Helen, can I call you that?" I gave no clear answer and only asked, "Is there something else?" He paused, then said, "You're leaving Hong Kong?" This morning, I had brought over a team of financial staff from Jingzhou to handle several companies. He had probably guessed that I was leaving. I gave a quiet mem. Then he asked, "When will you come back again?" Before I could answer, Victoria let out a scream. She had clearly been so stunned by what Luis had said earlier that only now did she react. I smiled, my gaze flickering slightly, and said, "When Victoria gives birth, I'll come back to deliver a gift. Luis, when the time comes, how about I give you a grand present?" He lowered his head and fell silent, his mood visibly off. These past years, I had almost never seen him look this gloomy. It reminded me of the first time I met him. At that time, I had just arrived in Los Angeles, unfamiliar with everything. People often mocked me for being a country bumpkin. They stuck chewing gum in my hair and smeared thick glue all over my chair. It wasn't bullying big enough to shock anyone, and it wasn't small enough to ignore. The teachers didn't care either, until one day. A few boys joked that they wanted to take me somewhere fun. They dragged me along. And at the last second, Luis stepped in front of me. He looked up at them and said coldly, "Fuck off." In the end, of course, it turned into a fight. He got hurt, but his expression remained gloomy as he looked at me and said, "From now on, you stick with me." As I carefully applied medicine to his wounds, I nodded. In that single instant, I was struck through. After that day, I became his little shadow, and I learned that he had been thrown abroad alone at the age of 15. Those 2 years overseas had left him with severe depression. At this moment, the feeling was a familiar one. It seemed like he was having an episode again, but I no longer wanted to care. After all, we were already divorced, so I simply pretended not to notice. A few seconds later, he looked at me and said, "All right, then you must come." Chapter 5. A few days later, I returned to Jingzhou. The moment I landed at Jingzhou Capital Airport, I unexpectedly felt a kind of homesick timidity. I remember when I was 22, after graduating from UCLA, I followed Luis to Hong Kong. At first, my parents did not react much, only complaining that once a daughter grows up, she can't be kept at home. But not long after, once they found out who Luis was, they almost decisively ordered me to return to Beijing immediately. At that time, my father, just like Luis's father, was so enraged he was nearly driven to death. He only told me to come back, and not to regret it after truly driving him to his death. I refused, and I did not understand why they would not allow us to be together. So we remained locked in that standoff. It was not until Luis had 3 ribs broken, was hospitalized for over half a year, and still insisted on marrying me, that my mother was finally moved. Half forcing and half persuading, she brought my father with her and flew to Hong Kong, where she told me an old story from many years ago. It turned out that my father and Luis's father had both once been stowaways who had made their way to Hong Kong. The two of them had gone through several pursuits and detentions together. During the most dangerous incident, Luis's father had nearly died in prison, and it was my father who saved his life by giving up his own water and food. But good intentions were not repaid with good intentions. During a major search, Luis's father reported my father. Because of that betrayal, my father lost any chance of staying in Hong Kong, but Luis's father stayed behind and made a fortune. Afterward, unwilling to accept that outcome, my father changed course and went to the capital instead. He clawed and struggled his way up through one hardship after another before finally achieving what he has today. Once he learned who Luis was, my father refused to yield. After all, if his father was that kind of man, then how could Luis possibly be any good? Later, my parents wanted to take me away, but I refused to leave. In the end, things escalated until I was almost completely estranged from them. 10 years have passed, and looking back now, whether it was Luis's betrayal and cheating during our marriage, or the fact that we ultimately divorced and went our separate ways, all of it can only be called karma coming full circle, and I, too, brought it upon myself. Chapter 6. Helen? Helen! A voice sounded out, unfamiliar yet carrying a trace of familiarity. I looked up and was a little surprised. I hadn't expected that he would be the one coming to pick me up. The man walking toward me was tall and slender. His fitted dark wool coat fell to his knees, and the black turtleneck underneath made him look especially restrained and ascetic. His brushed suit trousers, in the same color palette, were sharp and perfectly crease-free, paired with a set of derby shoes. His whole bearing was steeped in scholarly elegance. I waved and smiled, greeting him. "Pablo. Long time no see." Pablo, the son of one of my mother's close friends. He was the same age as me, a genius from birth, someone who had never come second in his life, from a family that had valued scholarship for 3 generations. Upright and exemplary to the core, I'd heard that he was now teaching at Peking University, specializing in psychology. He looked a little happy to see me. Reaching out, he took my suitcase for me, then handed me the hand warmer he had already heated in his pocket and said, "It's cold, isn't it? And it's only the beginning of December." Jingzhou has already had one snowfall. Compared to Hong Kong, Jingzhou was indeed much colder. I nodded. "Where are my parents?" They, over the past 2 years, as my parents and I had all grown older, the relationship between us had improved quite a bit compared with the earlier years. Still, back then, I had truly broken my parents' hearts. If they didn't come, I understood. They're both outside in the car. It's too cold, so I didn't let them get out. You'll see them in a moment. Pablo's voice was very pleasant. Standard Beijing speech with a touch of the frankness typical of Northerners, compared with Cantonese. With all its twists and turns, I missed this sound much more. A few minutes later, I sat in the front passenger seat of the SUV, a 5.7-meter Hongqi LS7, imposing and crisp in style. I saw my parents sitting side by side in the back seat. My heart gave several rapid thumps, and in just 1 second, my nose turned sour and I wanted to cry. Before I could speak, my mother leaned forward first. After staring at me for a few moments, her eyes reddened. Helen, you've lost weight. During this time, have you not been eating properly? After such a long time apart, the very first thing she said was, "You've lost weight." I pressed my lips together and called out, "Mom." All the endless grievance and all the disappointment that had built up for who knew how long came pouring out the instant I saw my mother. 5 years of passionate love, 10 years of marriage, and nearly half my life wasted away. How could I not hate it? But in Hong Kong, I had no safe harbor, and could only up a narrow, little patch of sky on my own. Luckily this was Jingzhou. I still had my parents here. My mother answered, wiped away her tears, and there we were, mother and daughter, looking at each other through tears right there in someone else's car. All right now. Why are you crying? It's not like it's some earth-shattering matter. Pablo will laugh at us. A few seconds later, my father gave a muffled cough. His voice sounded a little stiff, but still full enough. Pablo raised his brows and smiled. Uncle, I didn't bring my ears out with me today. I can't hear a thing. With that single sentence, the heavy sorrow in the atmosphere dispersed somewhat. I looked at my father and parted my lips. Dad, my father answered with a low then looked at me deeply and said, "You're back. That's all that matters." Chapter 7. That night, I went back to Wangjing with my parents. Pablo had class the next day, so he drove back to Haidian. This was the same apartment I had lived in before going abroad. By now, my parents had long since bought a bigger and more luxurious home in a better location. But now that I was back, I still wanted to stay here. After taking a shower, I nestled beside my mother and said, "Mom, can I sleep with you tonight?" My father let out a huff. "The moment you come back, you monopolize your mother." Honestly, I laughed and joked. The world's upside down. My father choked on that for a second, but then laughed too. My mother couldn't bear to refuse me, so she nodded. "All right, we mother and daughter can have a talk, and your dad can sleep in the guest room." I chuckled softly, genuinely happy from the bottom of my heart. After my mother and I turned off the lights and lay down, she still couldn't help herself. In a low voice, she asked, "So you and really divorced?" As if she was afraid saying his name would make me sad. She glossed over it vaguely. I gave a quiet hum. "We divorced. I got quite a lot of money from him." My mother pinched me lightly. "You child, a husband and wife are one body. What was his was yours to begin with. Besides, he was far too outrageous. He should have been the one to leave with nothing. That whole family is rotten to the core." Listening to my mother scold him in near outrage, I smiled and said, "Exactly. Mom, you and Dad really were better judges of character. I was the blind one. I do regret wasting so much time. If back then, if I had gone with my parents, would things have turned out differently?" The moment those words fell, my mother went silent. Only after a long while did she say, "Who hasn't had their judgment clouded before? It wasn't wasted. There's no road in life you walk for nothing. Every step counts. It's precisely because of those 10-odd years that you are who you are now." A tear slipped down my face in the dark. My mother didn't blame me, and that only made me feel even more foolish. I had actually been so certain that Luis would only ever love me. A few seconds later, my mother sat up and clicked her tongue. "If you ask me, Pablo is a good young man. Yes, he got married and divorced. But that child," I couldn't help laughing. That topic shift was a little too fast. "Mom, I know Pablo is a good person, but you can't just force it. Besides, he doesn't even like." "Who says that? He's liked you for years. If you hadn't run off to Hong Kong after Luis and gotten married, He wouldn't have suffered so much that he listened to his mother and got married too. And then he divorced in less than half a year and hasn't remarried since. I froze. Looking back over the years I had known Pablo, he really had liked following me around. When I was 15, I rode my motorcycle out of an alley and couldn't brake in time, crashing head-on into a bridge pillar. My knees hit the ground and were all bloody. Pablo didn't hesitate for a second. He threw down his bike, rushed over, and scooped me up in one go. A man who was usually as calm as a block of wood was now running around like a headless fly, muttering under his breath, "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. We're going to the hospital. The hospital. Where's the hospital?" I almost wanted to laugh. Coming back to myself, I saw my mother staring at me. I turned over and said, "Nothing like that. Don't worry about it. I'm not planning to get married again. Sleep. Sleep." My mother gave an "oh," and before going to sleep, still reminded me to think about it again. Chapter 8. A full week of rainy weather in a row. Even though the typhoon had not made landfall, it still brought its effects. At the private hospital in central Hong Kong, Victoria's voice was shrill and piercing. "I don't care. Get him here right now. I want to see Luis. He can't treat me like this." Luis rubbed his brow, feeling only that, ever since Helen left, he had become more and more exhausted. "Stop shouting. I'm here," he said from the doorway of the hospital room. The moment Victoria saw him, tears streamed down in strings, cradling her belly. She rushed out of bed, not even having time to put on her shoes. "Luis, I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have made such a scene and let everyone know you and Helen got divorced. I didn't know it would affect the company." The scene Victoria made that day outside the company spread very quickly. Before long, the parent company's stock price began falling again and again. Luis knew very well that this matter was not only the result of media hype. Helen had made her move. After returning to Jingzhou, she sold all her shares to Guangting. Guangting was her father's company, and its influence was even more astonishing than he had imagined. In just one short week, Helen used Guangting to force the parent company into a corner. If they did not want the subsidiary and several other companies to completely become Guangting's Hong Kong branch companies, they had no choice but to buy the shares back at a high price. If they refused to buy them back, then with Guangting's capabilities, it would only be a matter of time before all the companies were swallowed up. And after that, it would be the parent company's turn. If the parent company changed hands, his father would probably die of rage on the spot. Luis drew in a breath of cold air. So the interesting game she had mentioned was to make him, and the company, do exactly what Victoria had done this past year, offer themselves up as a sacrifice, burning their assets to serve as fuel for Guangting. What a steady, precise, ruthless method. Then he shook his head in thought. As expected of her, he still remembered that year, when she was only 17. Once she had gotten familiar with the environment at his side, she began slaughtering everything in her path. In one competition, she alone withstood pressure from 14 teams and several mentors who looked down on Chinese people, using the last $500 they had as startup capital. In only half a month she consecutively swallowed up the full assets of 4 teams. Then she joined him in crushing the remaining 10 teams, going from 500 to 5,000, and then all the way to $79,624. In no more than 3 months, they had won, and won completely. Later, she donated every bit of the money they earned back to their home country. Those blonde-haired, blue-eyed foreigners who spoke with their affected ABC accents were so furious they nearly blew their tops. Yet there was nothing they could do. The moment he thought of that, he could not help wanting to laugh. Back in those years, in that true foreign land where there had been only the two of them, his Helen had been by his side at all times. She had been like a little sun, melting away all the malice around him. Whenever she heard him arguing with his father, she would hug him and comfort him, knowing that he had been alone overseas, that he had once been excluded, looked down upon, bullied, and isolated, and had suffered baseless humiliation and scolding. She would cry for him in heartache, and all those emotions from the past, the ones that had almost driven him to collapse, were all resolved one by one after her arrival. Even when his depression flared up and he hurt himself, she would throw herself at him, hold him tightly, and keep saying, "I will stay with you forever." It was Helen who brought him back to life. Luis, Luis? The violent shaking pulled him back to the present. Victoria pouted unhappily and said, "What are you thinking about? Did you hear what I said? My daddy is asking when we're getting married." Luis pushed Victoria's hand away. Marriage? In this lifetime, he would only ever have one wife. A few seconds later, it was as if he had figured something out. Everything he had originally was Helen's to begin with. If she wanted it, he would gladly kneel and offer it up. Since she wanted to play now, then even if it meant lighting beacon fires just to amuse the feudal lords, why not? That's enough. I still have things to do. Stop making a scene. With that, Luis turned and walked away, leaving Victoria behind, shrieking herself hoarse. Chapter 9. Inside the speeding car, Luis's brows were tightly furrowed. He watched the video, where Helen's parents were looking at her with eyes full of smiles, while beside her sat a man with an upright, imposing figure. He had seen this man before in Helen's childhood photo albums. He remembered his name was Pablo. It seemed that in less than half a month, Helen's parents were already planning to find her a new marriage candidate. And this man, clearly, liked Helen very much. A few seconds later, Luis closed his eyes and thought. He had been wrong. He had assumed that even after the divorce, he would still be capable of keeping her by his side. Though he had signed the papers, he had only wanted to ease the hatred in her heart for a while. After all, they had been together for more than 10 years. She was so soft-hearted, surely she would forgive him in the end. But now, he suddenly felt afraid. In truth, whether it was Guangting or Jingzhou, what he feared most was still her parents. 10 years ago, Helen had been willing to abandon everything for him and run to Hong Kong, but now that she had returned to Jingzhou, getting her to head south alone again was likely impossible. When he opened his eyes again, a look of determination flashed across Luis's face. He took out his phone and made a call. "Release the shares. Book me the earliest flight to Jingzhou. The faster the better." Chapter 10. Helen. Good morning. I have one piece of good news and one piece of even better news. Which one do you want to hear first? During this period, I entered Guangting, bringing with me 3 billion as capital. No one could say a word against it. The one speaking to me right now was Zoe, the secretary my father had arranged for me. At 25, with both bachelor's and master's degrees from Peking University, she had been recruited into Guangting the moment she graduated. Having her work as my secretary was a bit of a waste of talent. I smiled and said, "Tell me the good news first." Her eyes sparkled. "This morning, Mr. Pablo sent flowers again. He said he just happened to be passing by. But I don't buy it. The bouquet style looks like it came from that old shop in the west of the city. TSK. That's dozens of kilometers round trip. Only then did I notice the bouquet of rose mallows on the wide desk. Pink tinged with soft white. Not many, 11 stems, symbolizing faith and waiting. I raised a brow and asked calmly, "And the even better news?" Zoe grew a little more serious, her speech quickening. "This morning, news came from Hong Kong. Luis's company released shares. Not too many and not too few, just enough for us to swallow the whole lot." Seeing that I didn't speak, she pulled back some of her smile. She asked cautiously, "Should we eat them up?" After all, Luis and I had been husband and wife for 10 years. It was normal that Zoe couldn't quite read my mind. I looked up and lifted a brow. "Why wouldn't we? Since when do we turn down money?" Zoe nodded. "Understood." I tilted my chin. "Go on." After she turned around, I took out my phone and sent Pablo a message. "Thanks for the flowers. Would you honor me by letting me treat you to dinner tonight?" Almost immediately, after 2 little buzzes, the reply came back. "The honor is mine." Chapter 11. That evening, by Yonghe Temple, at the entrance to Wudang Hudong, Jingyan Hanlin Academy, Pablo arrived first. He had booked one of the inner private rooms and was in the middle of pouring tea. "Sorry, traffic was a bit bad on the way." I set down my bag and took the seat to his right. Although it was a private room for 2, it was large enough for 5 or 6 people, yet I deliberately chose the seat right beside him. Pablo's hand paused slightly. He looked up at me. I had gone back specially to change clothes and put on makeup. I had swapped the lake blue silk blouse and black suit trousers I wore in the daytime for a fitted round neck dress with a side slit, knowing he liked woody scents. I had even changed my perfume on purpose. Pablo set down the shisha teapot in his hand and smiled as he asked, "Are we expecting another guest?" I raised a brow. Can't a woman dress up for the one who appreciates her? Even though I didn't have overly strong feelings toward him, I still had to admit it. He really was very smart. Being with a smart person was simple and easy, especially since he liked me, which made him even more considerate and attentive. Seeing that I didn't deny it, he stopped pressing the matter. He only told the server that the dishes could be brought in. We chatted casually, from north to south, from home to abroad. Suddenly, someone pushed the door open. His voice carried a trace of travel-worn dust, as though he had come from far away. "Sorry, all the private rooms are full. Would it be all right if I shared your table?" Luis had no idea where he had picked up this local custom. Now even he knew about sharing tables. Without even lifting my head, I said, "No, get out." He smiled, walked over, and sat down beside me. His gaze flicked over the hem of my dress, and Helen's face darkened a shade. "Guests should be welcomed. Helen, I've been on a plane for several hours. I'm exhausted." He spoke in a low voice, that shameless clinginess exactly the same as in the old days. "Sorry. I wonder if Mr. Pablo minds?" It was as if Luis had only just noticed Pablo, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He asked the question. Pablo looked at me and smiled as he said, "I don't mind, but we've already finished eating. If Mr. Luis is hungry, you can always order a few more dishes for this table. These are leftovers. After all, if you eat them, they'll probably be hard to digest." I raised a brow. Pablo was more aggressive than I had imagined. After saying that, he stood up and held out his hand to me. I didn't hesitate before taking it. Using his strength to rise to my feet, the two of us leaned close together, our distance already far beyond the safe boundary between ordinary friends. In just an instant, Luis's face darkened. He reached out to block us and said, "Helen, come home with me." I couldn't help smiling a little and asked back, "Go home? Go back where? This is my home." "Do you mean you want me to go back to Hong Kong with you? That is your home, not mine." Hearing my words, his back instantly went rigid. His face turned pale, and he seemed to struggle to breathe. Only after a few seconds did he say, "I wronged you. Whatever you want, the company, as long as you come home with me, I'm willing to." "Luis, I've realized that important people really do forget things easily." I cut him off. "You seem to have forgotten that we are already divorced. I won't go back, and I won't accept any of your goodwill." He pressed his lips together. Seeing how resolute I was, more than half the color drained from his face. It was as if he had suffered a grievous wound. I frowned slightly, and suddenly remembered that robbery we went through in Los Angeles. I still remember that it happened in my second year there. That group had been vicious. As if they had come prepared. They blocked several Asians and demanded money, ordered us to strip, and told us to hand over all our valuables. Luis used his body to shield me and glared at them fiercely. He whispered in my ear, "Stay close to me." I nodded again and again, terrified that with one wrong move we would both lose our lives there. A few minutes later, he seized an opening and got into a fight with one of them. Who would have thought that man had a gun? 2 bangs rang out, and I was scared out of my mind. But Luis's expression didn't change. He only said to me, "Stay close to me. Run, Helen. Don't be scared. Stay with me." My feet seemed to grow wings, and I ran after him just like that. Only after we reached safety did I realize that he had been shot once in the arm and once in the shoulder, and he had never said a word about it because he was afraid I would panic. Luckily, the thugs had been using some old junk that had passed through who knew how many hands, and the bullets weren't hard-jacketed. Otherwise, his left arm would probably have been ruined. I cried terribly hard, afraid he was going to die. The tears just wouldn't stop falling. Back then, his face had been as bloodless and pale as it was now, and even then he still hadn't forgotten to comfort me. "Stop crying. You look awful, like a little tabby cat." Now, I was afraid there was no going back to that time. I didn't want to be controlled by old emotions anymore. So I looked at him and said, "I remember that on the day of the divorce, you said that whatever I asked for in the future, you would agree." Luis's expression changed. He wanted to stop me, but he was too late. "I want you never to appear in front of me again for the rest of your life." I said that sentence twice, each time more serious than the last, each time more final. After I said it, I leaned against Pablo and said softly, "Luis, I'm going to try things with someone else. Don't come looking for me again. I'm going to start a new life." In that single instant, heaven and earth collapsed, and all things were destroyed. At that moment, Luis was like a fragile city ravaged by a typhoon. When he blinked, a tear actually fell. He opened his mouth, but all I could vaguely hear were a few words. "Don't do this. Don't do this to me, Helen." He had thrown everything away, sacrificing the family company, all just to beg for my forgiveness and bring me home. And yet I was standing here, holding someone else's hand, telling him that I was going to begin a new life. I didn't look at him again. I turned and left with Pablo. I knew he had always been gambling on my soft heart, whether it was the divorce or his relapses. But what had I done wrong? To be treated like this by him? I was unwilling to accept it, and I hated him. I hated how well he had treated me in the beginning, and I hated how now he had ruined everything. Chapter 12. Luis fell ill. He had always been stubborn. The extreme psychological illness he suffered from was triggered into relapse by my provocation. He spent his days in a daze, and it had already grown so severe that he could no longer feed himself. He could only rely on those cold medical machines to keep his vital signs going. The family business had also fallen into chaos. Guangting took the opportunity to swallow up a large number of shares and became the second largest shareholder after Luis. I heard that when Luis's father found out, he collapsed on the spot and was rushed into emergency care. Father and son both fell ill, and without someone stepping in to hold things together, the company would probably perish. In the end, it was actually Victoria who went to plead before her father, using her own life and the child in her womb as leverage. She forced him to invest money and effort. What a foolish girl, and what a pity that all parents love their children so deeply. In less than a month, Victoria's family business had half its life drained away, while Luis's company still remained half dead. The one that quietly and openly swallowed up all the shares on the market and came away with overflowing profits was Guangting. It was me. To make one mistake could be called a moment of clouded judgment. To make the same mistake a second time would be sheer stupidity. Just as Luis's family company was about to collapse like dry wood, to become nourishment for Guangting once and for all, and just as Luis himself was about to burn out completely, Luis's father came to Jingzhou and begged before my parents. He had only just come out of the hospital. His hair was completely white, and he trembled as he stood there, looking as though he did not have much time left. Now, before my father, he bent deeply at the waist, looking as if he had aged more than 20 years. A few seconds later, he actually dropped to his knees and cried out hoarsely, "Nestor, if you want my company, my life, if you want me to kneel here and beg you, apologize to you, confess that I wronged you, if you want anything at all, you may have it. I was wrong. I betrayed trust. I am lower than a beast. But my son, he truly loves your daughter. I only beg you to let her come and see him once. It was me who said I had cancer, that I needed my own grandson's bone marrow to prolong my life, and it was me who drugged Luis and made him spend one night with that girl. It is all my fault. Luis has never loved anyone else. He only wanted that child to save my life." Every sound was full of remorse, every word stained with grief. His whole heart and mind were filled with fear at the thought of losing his son. How different this was from the man who had left Luis alone abroad for years, and who had personally broken 3 of his ribs. Even though I knew that perhaps this too was a father's love, I still found it incomparably disgusting, incomparably twisted. Even with him kneeling and begging, my father did not agree on my behalf. He wanted me to make the decision myself. He only had someone send the old man to the hospital where Luis was, and then gave orders to find the best doctors available. I knew my father was afraid that if I chose to turn back and walk the road with Luis again, then under no circumstances could Luis's father die because of me. When parents love their child, they make plans that reach far into the future. But my mother could not bear it. Pressing her hand to her chest, she kept asking me, "Helen, what do you think?" I let out a long breath and said, "I'll go see him." Chapter 13. In the hospital, Luis was unusually clear-headed. He had just seen his father, his hair completely white, with not even half the aura of the old formidable patriarch left. It was all his fault. One misstep, and the hatred of a lifetime followed. He had harmed himself, and harmed his father too. At this moment, he still did not know that his father's cancer was a lie. All he knew was that, very soon, Helen was coming to see him. Half an hour later, I knocked on the hospital room door. Luis's eyes filled with joy. But the moment he saw Pablo behind me, they darkened. Still, he no longer dared put on airs. Propping himself halfway up, he said, "Helen, you came to see me." I nodded and said to him, "I came to tell you two things. If you can survive them, then live. If you can't, then dying is fine too." Luis's face was pale, yet he still forced out a smile and said, "I can survive it, as long as you're by my side." I did not respond to that. I went straight to the point. "Your father doesn't have cancer. You don't need to worry that he'll die from illness. Though then again, who knows? Maybe he still might." He froze for only a second before understanding. His lips trembled slightly as he said, "So that night," I gave a quiet hum, "your father drugged you." He lowered his head, looking both pained and helpless. I continued, "It's a good thing your father doesn't have cancer. If he did, Victoria's child still wouldn't have saved him, because that child isn't yours. In 10 years of marriage, the one who couldn't have children wasn't me." His face turned even paler, and he immediately understood why I was telling him these two things. He looked at me and said, "Helen, I wasn't." "I know." I cut him off. "Of course you weren't with Victoria because I couldn't have children. You were caught in your father's scheme. And you believed him. You wanted to keep that child's bone marrow to save him. But Luis, I don't believe you were really so stupid that you would simply believe your father the moment he said he had cancer." I lifted my eyes to him. "You wanted to save your father. Yes, but you also wanted a child of your own, even if you won't admit it. I know you too well. You didn't go verify whether your father truly had cancer because you wanted to use this chance to keep that child. You were going with the flow. You were waiting for the child to be born so that I would accept it. After all, in your mind, I couldn't have children, right? Luis, you didn't just betray me and betray our marriage. You insulted my intelligence, trampled on my dignity, and even betrayed the love I had for you. So my divorce from you wasn't a fit of anger. I was serious. Do you understand that?" I did not expect that the moment I finished speaking, Luis would faint. Within half an hour, 2 critical condition notices were issued for him. I stood outside the ICU, frowning. Then, looking at Pablo, who had come with me, a thought struck me, and I asked, "You're a psychology expert. Do you think?" He nodded. "It's real. Mental illness is the hardest to treat. If the patient has no will to live, the organs fail very quickly. There have already been many prior clinical cases. What you just said was enough to make him lose all reason to keep living. That's why I came, to help you see whether it was real or not. I think he may really die very soon." I was silent for a few seconds, then asked, "Then He shook his head. "It doesn't count, not even as negligent homicide." I gave a quiet "oh" and said nothing more. I only felt that Pablo was very good at reading the human heart. Another hour passed. In the end, Luis was still saved. The doctor said, "Mr. Luis has a very low will to live. How much he can recover in the future is hard to say." I have to admit, until this moment, the hatred in the bottom of my heart had not truly faded by more than half. And now, hearing the doctor say that Luis had very little will to live, I finally let go. Forget it. Let it count as sparing myself, and sparing him too. Chapter 14. After that day, I never went to the hospital again. For Luis and me, perhaps never seeing each other again was the best ending possible. As for his illness, there were professional doctors and psychiatrists to treat it. We were no longer 17, and no longer in a foreign city like Los Angeles. He no longer needed to protect me, and I no longer needed to cry for him. Later, I heard people say that Luis's father ultimately did not make it and died of illness. And because of his father's death, Luis finally came to his senses a little. After returning to Hong Kong, he sold off the family business and went to Los Angeles. As for Victoria, not only did she not get the wedding she had been waiting for, She also miscarried and was left half-crippled by illness. Only after her family business was dragged down did she begin to feel regret. And none of that had anything to do with me anymore. In the blink of an eye, it was already February, and the new year was almost here. Everywhere in Jingzhou was overflowing with the atmosphere of the holiday. Although I had grown up here, if I really counted it up, it had already been more than 10 years since I had properly wandered around the city. So I suggested going out and strolling around. But my parents had been in Jingzhou for a long time already. One waved a hand and refused, saying, "No interest." The other nudged me and said, "Have Pablo go with you." I was just thinking that maybe I should forget it, and if nothing else, go walk around by myself. But to my surprise, Pablo had already received my mother's orders, and the very next day he was waiting downstairs in Wangjing. Over those few days, we went to many places. Mostly all kinds of little alleys. Nanluo Guxiang, Bailuo Guxiang, Yendai Xijie, Qianmen Street. Everywhere was filled with Jingzhou's unique sense of ease and leisure. The 100-year-old Chinese ash trees lining both sides of the alleys swayed with golden leaves. And everywhere I looked were gray brick and black tile courtyard houses. An old man walked by carrying a birdcage, humming little snippets of Peking opera. As we passed through, I saw a persimmon tree from some unknown household, hung all over with red, lantern-like fruits. So many of them, plump and full, and yet no one picked them. They were left there for the birds flying overhead to peck at, until they dropped with a soft splat onto the ground. In Hong Kong, every inch of land costs a fortune. Even up on Victoria Peak, there is not the slightest bit of ease. Everyone is always rushing forward, forgetting the road they came from. I stared at that persimmon tree until I was completely absorbed. And only when Pablo spoke and told me to wait a moment, saying he'd be right back, did I come back to myself. I gave a quiet hum and told him to go ahead, and I kept walking slowly, looking around as I waited for him. A few minutes later, Pablo came back holding out a simple bouquet made of persimmons. The scent of fruit mixed with the smell of roasted peanuts drifted toward me, and attached to it was a square piece of white paper with the words, "Good persimmons, good peanuts." I raised a brow, a little pleasantly surprised. "You picked them from someone's house?" He nodded. "I saw you staring at the tree for a long time, so I went to find the family. When they heard I wanted to give them to a girl, they were delighted and used a long pole cutter to clip down quite a few. The peanuts were freshly roasted too. They smelled wonderful. I loved it at once, turning it over in my hands and looking at it from every angle. This suits my taste far more than that bouquet of roselles." The moment I said that, Pablo paused. I realized it sounded a little offensive and apologized. "Sorry. I didn't mean." He interrupted me. "Helen, I know what it is you're worried about. These past years, it's not that I've been waiting for you. It's just that finding someone who truly understands you is too hard. So I've stayed single and unmarried." I looked at him. I knew he had understood the meaning behind my words, compared with the faith and waiting symbolized by roselles. What I wanted now was the ordinariness of persimmons and peanuts. I had loved too bitterly and too painfully. I truly did not want to go through that once again. I had just opened my mouth to speak, only to realize I didn't know how to say it. Was I supposed to say, "I truly don't have feelings for you, even if you say you haven't been waiting for me these years"? I still feel pressured? Or was I supposed to say, "No matter what you do, as long as you have even the slightest intention of pursuing me, I'll feel a little uncomfortable"? But not long ago, I had just made use of him, and even said I was ready to begin a new life. How was I supposed to explain that? A few seconds later, as if he had seen through my thoughts, he looked at me and said seriously, "Friends, just friends, between friends, isn't helping each other only natural?" He was too decisive, and too good at understanding the human heart. In one clean stroke, he laid bare the very thing I had been most worried about, even though I knew that perhaps this was not the truest feeling in his heart. He was willing to say plainly that we were only friends, to promise firmly that he would not cross any boundaries again. He was willing to give me time and space, and at the same time protect that sensitive and awkward heart of mine. For that alone, I was already deeply grateful. A moment later, I smiled and said, "Thank you." He nodded and turned to walk ahead of me, as if he meant to show me a little more of the city of Jingzhou. And as I followed behind him, I found that alongside the ease, there was also a small sense of anticipation rising in me, not only for the time that lay just ahead, but also for the future. It's said that growing old together cannot simply be replaced by snow-white hair, and that to meet and know each other is already the best kind of fortune. But if there really is still an after for us, then perhaps some things can also be left to unfold naturally, as the heart wishes. That can wait until later. Epilogue, Luis. After my father died, I brought him back to Hong Kong and buried him beside my mother. My mother died in an accident when I was 15. She left suddenly, and her death plunged my father into enormous pain. Every time he saw me, he was reminded of her, so he chose to send me abroad. I once thought about it. If I had not met Helen 2 years later, would I, like my mother, also have died in some accident? Fortunately, I had Helen, but then, I lost her. After returning to Hong Kong, I became much more clear-headed. The thing that tormented me most was realizing that all of Hong Kong was filled with our memories. She had been here, living with me face to face, day and night, for 10 whole years. I do not know what exactly clouded my mind. How could I have let myself lose her? I only know that all of this was my own doing. She loved me so much, bearing 10 years of gossip and criticism for my sake. And yet I was greedy. While I already had her, I still wanted a child of my own. I could not keep staying in Hong Kong any longer, so I sold the company, and I could not go to Jingzhou either. She had said it herself. She did not want to see me again. She wanted to begin a new life. After thinking it over and over, I crossed the ocean and returned once more to Los Angeles. It seemed that only here was there still a little something left that could sustain me through the rest of my life. One day, I returned to the UCLA campus and sat for a long time beneath the big tree we used to visit so often. When I stood up, my legs had gone a little numb. I bent down and rubbed my calf, and then I suddenly saw a line of Chinese characters. So many years had passed, and yet it was still vaguely possible to make out what they said. Luis, I really like you. At that moment, the pain was so intense that I could hardly straighten my back. I coughed for a long time, until at last I coughed up a dark clump of blood and managed to catch my breath. I knew then that my time was running short. I looked at that line of writing very carefully. My reason collapsed again with a crash, shattering into pieces. I hid behind the tree and wept until I could not make a sound. What exactly had I done? Only when the sun was sinking in the west, I take out the Mont Blanc fountain pen from my pocket, the one that had long since run out of ink, and write, stroke by stroke, Helen, I'm sorry.